Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Khalid. But today is the 28th of February 2023, last day of the month of February. No, not 29 days this month. Nevertheless, lots to discuss on this last day of the month of February. We'll begin with Pakistan's fight against terrorism. 2 soldiers and a child have embraced martyrdom in separate incidents in North Waziristan and South Waziristan recently. The number of incidents pertaining to terrorism in Pakistan have increased in the last few months. Who is behind it? We all know. What is the strategy of these people? We also know to some extent. What is Pakistan doing to thwart all such attempts? We also know to some extent. But we are going to try to decipher many of the questions that pertain to all such terrorist elements that are now trying to create disharmony in Pakistan. Whether they come through Afghanistan or not, how is Afghanistan going to react now that there has been a Pakistani delegation to Kabul and assurances have been given to the Pakistani delegation that the Afghan government is going to do the needful in order to thwart such attempts from happening in Pakistan. Only time will tell. This is going to be our first story. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns human trafficking and its consequences in the world and in Pakistan. There is a 2-day conference that is happening in Pakistan. Sustainable Social Development Organization has organized this 2-day conference on combating human trafficking. How important is combating human trafficking in the world and in Pakistan? We've all heard about the boat capsizing in Italy, in which there are also Pakistani casualties. The FIA has also started a probe in it. How important is this probe as well? How important is the role of organizations such as the FIA to combat such elements from instigating trafficking in Pakistan? This and more will be discussed in our second segment. Then we'll be talking about the next general elections and the new digital census that is going to begin from tomorrow. It's going to go on for a month's time. This is unique for Pakistan because for the first time there's going to be a digital census. Either you, before the 1st of March, can enter all your data electronically on a website, or from tomorrow there will be teams which will be visiting you door to door and asking you for data and entering everything in front of you on their laptops. So of course we are entering into the digital age, and it's interesting to see how the census is going to go on for Pakistan. And finally, we're going to talk about Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the martyrdom of another youth in Pulwama by the Indian troops. This is something that has been ongoing, and we highlight it as much as we can. I hope the world will listen one day and will react in the necessary manner in order for India to stop such activities happening in the Indian held valley. Let's begin with our first segment, and that pertains to Pakistan's fight against terrorism. Whether it be elements that emanate from the Afghan soil into Pakistan, whether it be Pakistan's attempt to thwart all such elements, whether it be from TTP or the ISIK. More in the following report.
Pakistan has rendered matchless sacrifices in combating terrorism, and particularly the martyrs and the great sacrifices of the armed forces, police, rangers and other law enforcement agencies deserve generous accolade. The threat the insurgency poses to Pakistan was illustrated on January the 30th when a bombing at a mosque inside Peshawar's police compound killed more than 80 police personnel, and recently at the Karachi police office on February the 19th. Pakistan has vowed to address the external facilitation of terrorists, and attempts to spread chaos in the country through terrorism will be dealt with an iron fist. Last week, a high-powered Pakistani delegation led by Defense Minister Khaja Asif visited Kabul. This was the first high-level visit from Pakistan to Afghanistan since the spike in terrorist attacks in the country. Pakistan has given a clear message to the Afghan Taliban and presented hard evidence about the presence of TTP and shared the precise location of its leadership. The Afghan authorities gave a briefing to the Pakistani side. They listed actions they took against certain group of TTP and their future strategy. Terrorism is a common threat to both Pakistan and Afghanistan, and thus counter-terrorism cooperation between these countries is indispensable to combat growing scourge of militancy.
Brigadier Retired Saad Mohammed, Defense Analyst, joins us online. Sir, thank you very much to have joined us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you because you give a very incisive overview of terrorism and all such activities that happen in Pakistan and what needs to be done. Now, we all remember what happened in the police compound in the mosque. We all know what happened, which were the elements behind it. We also know the Pakistani delegation that has gone recently to Kabul, and assurances have been given by the Afghan side that such elements will not be allowed to continue. Nevertheless, there have been incidents in north-south Waziristan. How do you foresee the role of the Afghan government in order to stop such elements from entering Pakistani soil?
This is Pakistan's war, and Pakistan has to find solutions to ensure that Pakistan remains safe from all types of terrorist activities. It was a good thing that a high-powered delegation led by the defense minister and the DG of the Inter-Services Intelligence was also with him. And I think this should have been the final warning to the Afghan government that rules in Kabul these days, that enough is enough. The Peshawar incident was terrible, so was the Karachi incident. And on a daily basis, we hear these terrorist activities going on in Pakistan with their base and the major hub within Afghanistan. Now, there are problems here within the country also, I'm not denying that. However, the masterminds and the financiers and the other paraphernalia lies within Afghanistan, on the border provinces of Afghanistan. And if I go by the Turkish media, sources have told them that Pakistan has warned the Afghan government that if the terrorist activities don't stop, then Pakistan will take its own action to wipe out those terrorist bases which lie within the Afghan boundaries. Also, our foreign minister has said that the terrorist activities, if they continue like this, will not remain confined to Pakistan. I think that was a fair warning, and all countries of the region must know that if Pakistan is subjected to terrorism, then nobody else will remain safe. These terrorists have no boundaries. They may target one particular group at one time or one country at one time, and the others, it's not that they remain safe or outside their agenda. So I think Pakistan must now carry out, if those messages have been conveyed to the Afghan government, and it must mean business now. Those hubs that lie within the boundaries of Afghanistan must be wiped out.
Now, we are also hearing rumors, sir, about the Taliban getting training from our not-so-friendly neighbor India. Is there any truth to such rumors?
I wonder if training is required by the terrorists that way, that there would be some instructors coming from India and they would be training them in the camps in Afghanistan. I think ample training facilities are available within Afghanistan. They have been through over 40 years of war, and they know terrorism and they know this is a low-level insurgency much better than any other country. However, you can't rule out that funding is coming from, because that's very crucial. If you have the money, then you will get the resources, you will get the training facilities. And India's record previously, when the previous Afghan regime was there, the Indians were quite active in Afghanistan, funding these terrorist activities. Apart from that, you have seen the Iranian soil also being used by the Indians through clandestine operations across the Pak-Iran border, and Gulbashan Yadav is one prime example. He was within the boundaries of Pakistan, a serving commander of the Indian Navy, was within the territories of Pakistan, and his confessional statements should be an eye-opener for those who deny that our eastern neighbor is also involved in these terrorist activities. But as our foreign minister has said, that if Pakistan continues to remain subject to terrorist activities, then no other country remains safe. That's not a threat. That's a fact.
All right, sir. I'd also like to understand what, in your point of view, is the tactical objectives of all these militants, especially the TTP, trying to create havoc in countries such as Pakistan and staging attacks outside their areas of influence?
They have looked at the Afghan Taliban, and they consider the Afghan Taliban as their own. They belong to one group. Ideology-wise, they are on the same page. Now, they have looked at Afghanistan where, the insurgency there, or the fight against the NATO occupation of Afghanistan or the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, that such groups have prevailed. They don't understand that, the environment in Afghanistan was totally different. There were foreign troops within Afghanistan. But they take a cue that, if that such major powers can be brought on its knees, and they can be, forced to go out of the country, they can do the same in Pakistan. They're mistaken, but that's what they believe in. And once, if they start believing, and we don't counter it, we don't balance the terror with the terror, and they continue hitting us, and we sit paralyzed, then they will be emboldened. So that's what I said, that, the war must now be carried to these terrorists, to the source where they are located. We must root out the source.
All right, sir. I'd also like to, in the perspective of this delegation's visit to Kabul and the concerns of Pakistan that include TTP's ideological alignment with TTA, the legacy of coexistence, the hideouts of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan shelters in Afghanistan, and unaccountable movement and activities of the TTP with deliberate facilitation of the Afghan side. What now should be the contours of our Afghan policy?
Our policy should be such that we must aim at the terrorists, not the Afghan people. So any measure, any policy that we adopt, or any action that we should take, should not hit the common Afghans. Now, for example, closing the borders is not an option, because that hurts the common Afghan more. It hits those people who are innocent, who have got nothing to do with terrorism. There are sick people coming to Pakistan. On Pakistani side, there are traders who are trading with Afghanistan and making a living. So that should not be. The aim should be to go find out where the terrorist is and eliminate him. That's what the policy should be. Not punish Afghanistan as a state, not punish the poor people of Afghanistan. Punish the terrorists. Punish their, their supporters, but not the common Afghan.
All right. So in the latest development, Zabiullah Mujahid, who is the Afghan Taliban spokesperson, has also confirmed to media that intelligence and military chief of the ISK was killed during an operation in Kabul. Is this under the backdrop? Is it a follow-up, in your point of view, of the meetings that were held between the Pakistani and the Afghan side?
IS is one terrorist organization which is opposed to the Afghan Taliban. So I don't think so. At this point in time, there is so much of cooperation that, it could be that Pakistan provided the assistance to eliminate these people. I think that would be an Afghan operation itself, because that's a major threat to the present Afghan regime. They remain a threat to Pakistan also, because they include the IS ideology. South Asia is a province, Khorasan, which includes South Asia. Is a province of the, what they call the Islamic State. So the Taliban would be more concerned with the IS because that's an immediate threat to them. For Pakistan, they're not an immediate threat. So, but they remain a threat. They're a terrorist organization, and they have been, they have their sleeper cells in Pakistan, and they could strike Pakistan also. So there we can offer the Afghans cooperation. The problem is that Pakistan and the rest of the world can extend help to Afghanistan to eliminate these terrorist organizations. And I think the United States has told them very well that they must stick to the Doha agreement, in which they have said that there will be no terrorist organizations based on the soil of Afghanistan. And the soil of Afghanistan will not be used against any other country. But unfortunately, the Afghan government has not followed that. And today, about 4 to 5 terrorist organizations remain on their soil, and they don't seem to be bothered about that. They must get bothered if they want recognition, if they want to be part of the international community, if they want to be a civilized country, then they must eliminate terrorist groups from their soil.
All right, so Brigadier Sahib, our intelligence agencies, when of course the delegation visited Kabul recently, also gave evidence of TTP's presence and precise location of leadership in Afghanistan, which was something that was being not properly accepted by the Afghan side. And now it was accepted, and they agreed to fix the issue, promised to work for regional peace and control the TTP elements inside of Afghanistan. I'm telling you that because there is a recent report from the US, from a US think tank, the US Institute of Peace, that says that the Afghan Taliban will continue to foster support to the TTP. Do you feel, under the current ambit of all the events that have happened, that the Afghan Taliban might change their relationship with the TTP, or do you feel this is something that is going to continue unabated?
I think this is a deliberate policy on part of the Afghan government that they support these terrorist organizations like the TTP, and there are others also. Now, they will only change policy if their core interests are threatened. And we must do that. We must ensure that the price for support of the Taliban becomes a little too, unacceptable to them. Unless we make that policy unacceptable, they have to pay a price for that, and a heavy price. Only then will they change policy. Otherwise, I don't think so. Appeasement will work, or delegations visiting them are going to work, or providing them evidence. They know that the TPP is on their soil. What evidence do they require? We have to tell them you have to take action. So unless they take action, and action they will only take, policy they will only change if the support becomes a bit expensive for them.
What should be Pakistan's policy as far as tackling the TTP is concerned? Do you feel that we should go forward with another operation, such as the operations that we have successfully handled in the past, or do you feel there should be non-kinetic measures that also should be put into place parallel?
You know, the TTP has no support in Pakistan. It's a terrorist organization, and if you see that once, about a year back, when or more than a year back, when the TTP elements returned to some of the areas of Pakhtunkhwa, there were huge demonstrations, against the presence of the terrorists on their soil. So they don't have any popular support. So you don't require a narrative as such that, to counter their narrative. Now, what we should do is that our intelligence-based operations should be such that we are able to identify who are their associates here, and wipe out those associates within Pakistan. So it is more of intelligence-based operations. We must ensure that the police does all this. The army should not be used for policing duties. Counter-terrorism should be the job of the police, and at best, the civil armed forces. The army should come in only if there is a dire requirement for the army to move in. Otherwise, there should be police. So the capacity of the police, especially in the erstwhile tribal areas, must be brought to such levels where they can deal with the terrorists. For that, organization, training, and weaponry is a must, because the Taliban, after the American withdrawal, have laid hands on very sophisticated equipment. So we must match the equipment that the Taliban have, and the training and the motivation. The police leadership must wake up, and we will not accept, such negligence, criminal negligence, as it happened in Peshawar, as it happened in the CCPO office in Karachi. So there must be accountability there. And then, where the army role comes in, where our intelligence role comes in, is wiping out those hubs which lie outside the boundaries of Afghanistan. They must be dealt with.
Sir, you talk of counterterrorism. Before I come to cooperation or collaboration in counterterrorism between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or Pakistan and China, Pakistan and the US, as has been reiterated in statements by both the spokesperson of the Chinese and the US government, I'd like to highlight a little bit about the cases that have come recently. 2 soldiers, 1 child martyred in North-South Waziristan attacks. 15th of February, 70 TP men were killed in North Waziristan clash. 22nd of January, police vehicle escapes a bomb blast in Peshawar's Badabair area. 14th January, Deputy Superintendent, 2 constables are martyred because of militants, and of course the TTP claimed to be behind this. Police constable was martyred. Another suffered gunshot wounds as well between the 6th and the 7th of January. I mean, the list goes on and on. Do you feel Afghanistan, if you go a little bit in the past, in 2018, Pakistan and Afghanistan had signed a counter-terrorism agreement to work on counter-terrorism. Do you feel the ambit or the the whole contours of this counter-terrorism agreement could be renegotiated?
I think we have done enough negotiations, and we have sent enough delegations to Afghanistan. And the one that traveled last time, I think, if the media is right, I have no inside information, But if the media sources who claim that Pakistan has given a final ultimatum to the Afghan government that they better rein in these militants, we don't. Maybe they don't want to hand them over to us, but they should be relocated. They should be relocated to the northern provinces. They want to keep them, and they like them very much. They were their partners in the fight against the American occupation of Afghanistan. So if they want to keep them, please keep them. But they should not bother Pakistan. No terrorist activities against Pakistan should be accepted. So I think negotiation time is over now, and our final warning, if the media is right, has gone to the Afghan government. Let's see. Let's wait and see. If they act on it, if they don't act on it, then Pakistan has to take action on whatever Pakistan has told them. That we must carry it out, because empty threats or empty promises that we will deal with it, then they do not work.
Brigadier Sahib, I'd also like to understand some of the points that were talked about, discussed during this meeting between the Afghan and the Pakistani side in this recent visit that you have also mentioned. One thing that I'd like to understand is Pakistan's goodwill that was stated to the Afghan side should not be taken as a sign of weakness and tangible actions be taken against TTP militants. Pakistan's goodwill not be taken as a sign of weakness. We have been harboring migrants from the Afghan side since decades. We still have a very open policy, have had that we have millions of Afghans that are accounted for and others that are unaccounted for working in Pakistan. Do you feel that the Afghan side is taking Pakistan for granted?
Unfortunately, that the governments that they come in Afghanistan, they somehow remain hostile to Pakistan for no reason. Let's take the current Afghan government. Pakistan, their leadership stayed here, their families stayed here. Probably some of the families are still here. I have no idea, but I would assume that some of the families of some of their top leaders are still here in Pakistan. The other is that initially when this government came in, I think Pakistan went out of the way. Despite criticism at the international level, Pakistan went out of the way to help them. But they started, started digging deeper. Pakistan wanted to take them out, but the policies that they have adopted, the internal domestic policy, especially regards the education and human rights, they somehow started adopting very harsh policies. Now, I have knowledge that within the Afghan Taliban, this is a minority view that the policies that they are adopting. The majority, but the minority is, powerful. And they are dictating the policy. They are calling the shots. So at this point in time, I think Pakistan's, goodwill has not been reciprocated.
The provocations by the Afghan forces along the Pak-Afghan border, whether it be in the past when there was a huge UN cry when we were putting up fences, and of recent also as far as the various border crossings are concerned, and the mismanagement from the Afghan side as far as these border crossings is concerned. We all remember what happened at Torkham when the Afghan side blocked that border very recently as well. Do you feel that also needs to be renegotiated or talked about, or some tangible action needs to be put into place as far as that is concerned?
There was a problem probably due to some mishandling by locals over there. The it escalated into this incident in which the Afghans returned the fire on the Pakistanis from Shamshat Sahib and Javed posts. They attacked the Pakistani forces at the Torkham border. There were some injuries. Thankfully, there were no loss of life at that time. What Pakistan must do is, ease the movement. I'm not saying that, it should be a no holds barred entry to Pakistan and everybody who's coming from Kabul should enter Pakistan without documents. They must be documented. They must come on a visa. But there could be at times problems in which the local officials should be given some, degree of autonomy. Like if there are some sick people now, unfortunately, for example, dialysis. I'll just take one example, dialysis. Even during the entire 20-year regime of the Karzai and Ashraf Ghani regime, they could not, despite Pakistan offering them a dialysis center, they did not take Pakistan's offer. There was no dialysis center in Afghanistan. And dialysis, a man in Mazar Sharif does not go to Uzbekistan. He wants to come to Pakistan. He feels comfortable here.
All right.
So if there's a man who requires dialysis immediately,
of course, I mean, so much needs to be done, and as you have yourself said, Brigadier Saab, that you yourself stated, sir, that more has been, I mean, the final meeting that has been held between the Pakistani side and the Afghan side in Kabul has reiterated the facts and figures as far as the intrusion from the Afghan side into Pakistan of elements such as the TTP is concerned, and of course we have told the Afghan side of what needs to be done. Let's see how all of this moves forward or boats forward as far as the tense relationship that is because of the incursion of TTP between Pakistan and Afghanistan goes forward. I hope some kind of a tangible solution comes forward. We have notified the Afghan side of what needs to be done. Let's see whether they come up to their promises as has been promised to the Pakistani side in this latest meeting. We have to go to a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and in our second segment we're going to talk about human trafficking. Now, as far as the definition of human trafficking is concerned, there are different, but the main crux is that it's the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring or receipt of people through force, fraud or deception with the aim of exploiting them for profit. We've seen a lot of that happening recently in the past few years as well. We all have also seen the latest report that has come as far as the migrant boat capsizing on the coast of Italy is concerned, and the probe that the FIA is also going to make as far as this incident is concerned. That and more will be part of this important segment. We've been joined by two important guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. In the studios, we've been joined by Dan Nash. He's the co-founder of Human Trafficking Training Center. Dan, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having us.
Pakistan. Our next guest is Alison Phillips. She's a professor at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, Wizard of Oz. Alison, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
And welcome to Pakistan as well. I hope we are treating you well.
Indeed, yes.
Dan, let's begin with you. What should be the new approaches as far as combating human trafficking is concerned? We've seen a lot of developments, whether it be on the United Nations, whether it be in the United States, whether it be in Africa, whether it be in Asia. But the modalities of human traffickers change with the times. How should the world change itself accordingly in order to curb trafficking?
Well, first of all, it would be getting to a point where we can try to prevent trafficking. We always want to prevent it before it happens. But then from a perspective, once it's happening, I think the most important thing is probably two things, and that is number one, historically, governments all across the world have not always thought of the trafficking victims as victims themselves, because sometimes they're forced to do these crimes, and sometimes we end up arresting the victims. So not doing that, not treating the victims as though they are a suspect. And then secondly, we see this all across the world, and that is we have to properly train our police, because the police are really on the front lines of being able to identify trafficking, being able to identify the traffickers, and really being able to stop trafficking.
Alison, when one looks at your profile, it's quite interesting. You've researched trafficking victims, you've ran to non-profits working with victims of human trafficking as well. What is the basic crux of the mentality of the victims of human trafficking that you've encountered?
So one of the things that we try to teach about human trafficking that I think is helpful to understand is that very rarely are victims actually kidnapped or abducted into this. Usually what comes before it is a long seasoning of psychological manipulation, brainwashing, and so forth. And the entire purpose of that is to make the victim come to a place where they really blame themselves for getting into the situation. They think it's their fault. And so they don't necessarily think of themselves as a victim. They think they're in some kind of bad situation, certainly, but may not necessarily be aware of the violation of their human rights.
Dan, what in your point of view are the best international practices as far as tackling trafficking in person is concerned? And what are the recent anti-trafficking mechanisms that are at play, for example, in the United States? And do you feel there are certain policy gaps that lead to lacunas that the traffickers take advantage of?
So one of the first things that I think any country would need to do, and that is to have some type of trafficking law that will deal with trafficking and give the police and prosecutors the tools that they need to be able to stop trafficking. So here in Pakistan, you guys passed that law in 2018. It's almost identical to the laws that we have in the United States that we passed and what other countries are doing. And that consistency is really important because some of this is definitely in country and then some of it is out of country with organized crime networks rolling through Europe and to the United States and different places. So to have similar laws on the books in places like Pakistan, places like Europe, places like the United States is a really good first step.
All right. In your point of view, Alison, what are you satisfied by the policies that have been implemented by Pakistan so far? Dan has highlighted the policy in 2018, the law that has been passed by Pakistan in 2018. As far as strengthening institutional capacity or collaboration of various stakeholders is concerned, what more needs to be done by countries such as Pakistan?
So I think Pakistan is off to a great start. I think the laws that were passed in 2018 are a good foundational point. The conference that has been here the last 2 days is also a very good step to bring together parliamentarians, law enforcement, academia, social service organizations. To bring all of those people together in a room together is a tremendous accomplishment. It's not something that we are able to do or see in the United States, but it's very much necessary if we want to increase our capacity. For each agency to be successful, we have to learn to work together, and so bringing them together for a conference like this is beautiful.
Dan, speaking of this conference, the 2-day conference ended today. What would you take out? What would be the crux of this 2-day conference as far as the different discussions that were held by the different parliamentarians, as Alison pointed out? What has been retained by yourself, by Alison, after these 2 days?
Two things for me, and the first is what I saw is the same problems that you have in Pakistan are the same problems that we have in the United States, and the same problems that I think most countries around the world are having. It doesn't matter what part of the world you live in, but the problems with human trafficking are really the same. And then secondly, it was very positive, like Alison said, having all these different groups there together. And during the sessions that we were leading, there were groups of police and there were groups of other people, and historically, and this happens everywhere around the world, these different groups work in their own little silos and not really working together. So one of the things that we discussed was there are certain law enforcement in Pakistan that they weren't sharing information together. So they didn't know what that law enforcement was doing, and this law enforcement didn't know what that was doing. And being able to improve things like that is a really big deal, because then all the law enforcement together might be able to know that that person is a trafficker or that person is a trafficker. And when they move from province to province, it's much easier for law enforcement to deal with.
Alison, being a woman, I mean, I don't want to be asking questions about women and children, but this is a question that comes to mind when I think of you, because you have talked to so many victims. Why are women and children most of the victims of human trafficking, A? And how does it impact the female gender as far as children as well? How are they more vulnerable to the traffickers?
Yes, and that's really human trafficking, regardless of whether it's in the United States or Pakistan or anywhere in the world. It really comes down to exploitation of vulnerability. And so certainly, of course, women and children have more vulnerabilities. And in cultures where women's rights are not as recognized, that also increases vulnerabilities.
All right. Dan, we all have read or seen the incident of the migrant boat capsizing on the coast of Italy. The FIA, this is a Pakistani organization, has launched a probe into the network of traffickers that are responsible for sending Pakistani migrants abroad who died after their boat sank off the coast in this Italy. How significant, in your point of view, is this coordination mechanism between organizations such as the FIA with other organizations in order to A, understand the modalities of human trafficking in Pakistan, and B, to stop human traffickers before they move on and cause damage, A, to people through deaths, or to laws through human trafficking?
That's very crucial and very important. Being able to have your local police and FIA cooperate and share information and work together, create a task force, so to speak, to stop human trafficking, which is one of the things that came out of this conference the last couple of days, was creating a national task force to combat human trafficking. And then being able to work together with your NGOs, your non-governmental organizations that are providing services, because even if you prevent a trafficking incident, now you have these victims that need help. They need all kinds of different services, and that's something that the police are not set up to do. So being able to have those partners that you can then call and say, okay, we found these trafficking victims, now we need your help to provide them the services that they need.
Speaking of help, Alison, you have trained thousands of officers as far as human trafficking is concerned. The human traffickers use updated technology, especially with the onset of social media, digital media. They use that a lot. Do you feel you could evolve a mechanism for countries such as Pakistan as well to train the police officers, to train the officers in the FIA, so that they understand the latest modalities that the human traffickers use?
Yes, and that's actually something that we try to emphasize in our trainings is understanding the ways in which traffickers use these various tools and understanding them. And it's almost kind of the analogy I would give. It's like studying a professional sports team would study the opposing team they're going to play next week. We learn their plays, we understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and we use that to our advantage. And that's the kind of mindset that we want to encourage in law enforcement, is to go into the game with a winning mentality. Not to show up for it.
Dan, some basic questions, layman questions, let's put it that way. How is human trafficking different from migrant smuggling?
So smuggling by itself is a crime against a country's sovereignty. It's a crime against the country itself, whereas human trafficking is a crime against that person. So an example would be, I could pay you money and I can consent to you smuggling me across the border, but I cannot consent to being trafficked, just like I cannot consent to being murdered, right? So it's a crime against a person versus a crime against a country. And while they're completely different crimes, does it make me more vulnerable if I'm a smuggling, being smuggled by you? Does it make me more vulnerable to trafficking? Well, for sure it does, because maybe you say it's going to cost me $5,000 to get across the border, but then when I get across the border, you say no, now it's going to cost you $20,000, or you're going to have to do this, or you're going to have to do that. So it makes them very vulnerable.
Alison, as far as the United Nations Trafficking in Persons Protocol is concerned, the consent of the victim to the exploitation is irrelevant with the threat or the use of force and deception. Is this still applied in principle across the world, including in Asia, in Africa, and other countries, or the people that you have encountered, the victims that you have talked to?
No, it isn't. And so this is where we have a difference between the laws that are implemented, the laws that are established and put in place, and the ways in which they're implemented. And so that's why we really emphasize that it's not enough to make good laws. You have to partner or couple those laws with training so that the people who will be using them, mainly law enforcement and the prosecutors and judges, understand what the law, how it's defined, and what powers it gives and what it doesn't. And the analogy I use, it's like giving tools to a carpenter, but if they have no training on how to use the tools, they will just sit in the toolbox.
So training is primordial. Training is extremely important. And I hope the message has gone across to the relevant quarters in Pakistan.
Exactly. And when law enforcement in particular is trained, it is a total game changer.
Dan, when you look at the statistics as far as the traffickers are concerned, most are male, most are young. Why? Why is there a certain age bracket, related to human traffickers, not the victims, but the perpetrators?
I think that comes down to the criminality part, right? What we see in the United States, and I'm sure you see that here, is that most of the individuals that are committing crimes are younger. That doesn't mean that we don't have older males that are committing some crimes, but if you look at the makeup of the prison system, you look at the makeup of crimes across the board, most criminals have a tendency to be younger, right? So as persons get involved in criminal activity, they're already younger. Consequently, the traffickers are younger.
Alison, I'd also like to understand how widespread, in your point of view, is human trafficking. According to the data that I saw that pertains to 2020 and given by the United Nations, there are in 2018 there were 50,000 human trafficking victims reported in 148 countries.
Yes.
Between 2020 and 2023, has that number increased? Has the number of countries that are involved increased?
The experts who estimate how many victims of human trafficking we have across the world, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking, other forms of it, do tell us that the estimates are on the rise. What I think is most important for people to keep in mind are not necessarily the numbers that these statistics give us. It's that in terms of dollars, human trafficking is the second most pervasive crime on earth, behind the illegal trade in drugs. And if we think about the impact and the visibility of drugs on any society, it's significant. We can all see that. And here we have this crime second to it. And at least in the United States, I sit in front of crowds of people all the time, and they are shocked to learn that this is something that is happening in their midst.
She talked about some of the forms of human trafficking. What are the basic forms that you have encountered, Dan, of human trafficking since you've been associated with it?
So what most people think of is when they think of human trafficking is what we see on movies or social
series,
media, yes, and that is sex trafficking or labor trafficking. But there's really more to that, because really what trafficking is just forced criminality. It's forcing someone to commit a crime so that I can profit from that. So things that we see very commonly in the United States is not only sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but we see a trafficker forcing someone to be a drug trafficker, a trafficker forcing someone to illegally use stolen credit cards, a trafficker forcing someone to commit robberies, a trafficker forcing someone to steal or beg on the street. It's forcing people to do a variety of different crimes that we refer to as just forced criminality. And historically, law enforcement has missed that. And we end up arresting a victim maybe because they're using this credit card without knowing that behind the scenes, the trafficker is forcing them to do that.
All right, Alison, last two questions, one from you and the last from Dan. What are the kinds of industries that are affected by human trafficking?
What kind of industries are, I would say, particularly with labor trafficking, you will see that in unskilled labor pools. You'll see it in agriculture work, you'll see it in factory work, construction, any kind of jobs where you have pools of unskilled labor. That's where you'll see a lot of that. In the United States, a lot of what happens through sex trafficking will overlap with commercial sex businesses, things like pornography, strip clubs, and so forth. It overlaps into it.
All right, and finally from Dan, I'll ask you two questions. This question is in two parts, and I'd like a quick, snappy answer to that. What is the role of transnational organized crime groups in human trafficking? This is the first part of my question. The second part is, do most of the traffickers get caught, apprehended, and convicted?
I'm going to answer the second part of that question first, and the answer to that is no. And that really comes down to lack of training. If you don't have training, the police can't catch them, and the prosecutors have to be trained to prosecute them. So the answer is no. A very small percentage of them are caught and prosecuted. And the first question is yes. We see multinational and transnational organizations that do a lot of human trafficking. In the United States, we have that down to basically 5 main groups, and 4 of the 5 are transnational groups. So yes, that happens everywhere.
Final question, quick answer from the both of you. Is there a legal instrument apart from the UN protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons that was passed in 2000? Do we need to have more such instruments and protocols into place across the world? I'll start with you, Alison.
So in the United States, when we first enacted our trafficking in persons law in 2000, that law has been reauthorized many times. It's been over 20 years. And what happens through that is we take the initial framework and we build upon it as our nation makes progress. And so I would recommend that as Pakistan builds up their response to human trafficking, that they similarly adjust as they move along.
Dan.
I would agree with that. Because the criminality is fluid and is constantly evolving, the law needs to constantly evolve to match that. Unfortunately, the law is usually behind the criminality, but as you grow, you need to constantly move.
And for that, we have conferences such as the one that you took part in, this 2-day conference, and I hope that a lot of concrete results will emanate out of this as far as collaboration is concerned, as far as understanding of what human trafficking is and how we can combat it together as nations or together as one entity of the global body. Thank you so very much, Dan Nash. Thank you so very much, Alison Phillips, to have joined us and to have talked to us about so many different aspects of human trafficking. I wish we had more time, and I hope we get to meet again soon to talk about more aspects of human trafficking. Thank you very much to the both of you. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.